So today is chapter 10. It's a long chapter, to the standard of most chapters in the Andre Luiz collections. We will do our best to finish. We don't have to finish. I think the important is understand the messages here, and there is lots of good messages. But perhaps the reading will be a little bit longer than what I usually like. And just to give a quick recap of where do we stand right now. This book, Action and Reaction, is really very focused in this law of action and reaction, cause and consequences. Of course, integrate together with all the laws, with the law of progress. And they primarily work on the case of Olympian Mello. Andre Luiz and Hilario are visiting Mansão Paz, or Peace Mansion, which is a house of assistance in the lower zone, one of those outposts in the lower zones that receive spirits from the lower zones in tremendous debt with the divine laws, who are in condition of being assisted, who have done the very minimum required even to be able to be helped. And they received this individual, this spirits Olympio, in very bad shape, with the mind completely under hypnosis, secondary to his crimes or to his crime while incarnate. Olympio Mello, out of greed, selfishness, murdered his two younger brothers to keep the possession of the family fortune. Olympio Mello's wife, Alzira, they had one son by the name of Luiz. And of course, when the two brothers went back to the spiritual world, murdered by Olympio, they seek revenge, and they kind of hypnotized and tormented Olympio Mello. And while Alzira was still incarnate, they also obsessed her, leading her to her murder, to be drowned in the same lake where Olympio drowned the brothers. Alzira went back to the spiritual world, but being a little more evolved, the spirit was not as dominant as much, and quickly was able to overcome the desire for any ill sentiments, and on the contrary, she has very eloquent sentiments towards their husband and towards her brothers-in-laws. Even though they tormented her, she has not only completely forgiven them, but she seeks to help them, assist them in turn around the sentiments, that desire for revenge. And the two brothers, the name Clarencio and Lionel, they're going to see a lot in this chapter. It's all about them now. They are tormenting Luis, the son of Alzira and Olympio. Silas, in this story, the primary is the only one who is incarnate. Still incarnate, he is in possession of all the fortune that Olympio Mello seeked to keep, and now is the prosperer, as proper as a farmer, but being tormented by Lionel and Clarencio, he is becoming more and more greedy, more and more attached to material things, and as often when it happens, they become extremely vigilant towards the materiality, fearful that something's going to happen, and stress is always the negative, as we're going to see here as well. Silas is one of the workers in Mason Pass. Silas has his own debit with the divine laws, as the previous chapter, chapter 9, was all about the case of Silas, in which he explains that out of greed, selfishness, he committed some serious crimes in a previous reincarnation. It doesn't say it was directly the last one of the one prior. I don't think that really matters. But he commits some crimes that he is now seeking the opportunity to repair on the next reincarnation. One of those crimes was he did not use his talent. He had a talent for medicine. He went to the medical school, graduated, and never practiced because he was more interested to keep his eyes in his future, his fortune, make sure that his daddy would work things well and leave all the fortune for him. And out of this state of mind, he corrupted his own father. He led his father to commit murder against his stepmother. The mother died at a relatively young age. The father remarried, and he did not accept the idea of the father remarrying because now they have to share their wealth in case of the death of the father with that stepmother. So he found a way to get rid of her. And after they spent some time in the lower zone, he was also rescued in Mason Pass, recovered, morally speaking, and now seeking a new reincarnation, which he would again be born son of that same father that he corrupted in the past. Now will be direct son of the one of the woman who was the stepmother in the previous reincarnation, the one that he is somewhat responsible for her death. But in order to do that, they need to find this woman, Aida, that is somewhere in the lower zones, suffering tremendously. So they will eventually have to find her, rescue her, prepare her to restart this process of the reincarnation of the three of them. All that was covered on chapter 9. And that chapter 9 was important for us to see how Silas is now so committed in assisting other individuals through their reparation process. And in this process, he is assisting himself in being well prepared to be successful in the reincarnation that lies ahead. And we can see in him a tremendous turnaround from the selfish, greedy individual to a very selfless individual, far from being a perfect spirit, far from being a high order spirit, still is an average spirit, pretty much like ourselves, but who have got the idea, the message of how to reach a true happiness, a true peace with his own conscience, what pretty much all of us seek for ourselves. So this chapter 10 continues with the engagement of Silas, who have the company of Andre Luiz and Hilario, when they go to the house of Luiz, the son of Olympio and Alzira again, where Clarencio and Leonel, the two brothers who were murdered by Olympio, are now obsessing this Luiz and try to help those two brothers to leave aside this desire for revenge and try to look ahead for the future in the process of their own reincarnation. The plan for these two brothers, for Olympio and Alzira, is that eventually Olympio and Alzira will reincarnate, will be husband and wife once again, and will receive the two brothers, Clarencio and Leonel, as sons. And with that integrament of the family ties, they would help one another and overcome all this state of ill sentiments. In order to do that, they have to get Leonel and Clarencio on board with the plan. Olympio, I don't think he'll be able to participate on this plan at all. He'll be on those incarnations in which that we say that sometimes necessary that the spirit will reincarnate without knowing the plan, without participating of the plan because they are not in condition mentally, intellectually to participate at all. Alzira is totally on board. Alzira is looking for the opportunity of do her own reparation and assist those three individuals. Now they have to work on Clarindo Leonel and try to get them on board. The question they would be asked is, well, could they reincarnate in the same situation as Olympio? Not if they don't want to participate, they just participate without wanting anyway. The answer would be they could, but ideally, that would not be the best. Because again, they are victims. They are victims of the cruelty, and they are now practicing wrong, but because they were victimized by Olympio. So for them, divine law says that it's they are more victims than criminals in this entanglement in that story. So it is important to get them to lower the level of ill, bad sentiments. If cannot zero, at least lower it, to get into that reincarnation with a better state of mind to make things to work. Because if they go into the next reincarnation still so contaminated by anger, so contaminated by the desire for revenge, with a state of mind that leads them to seek revenge against that would be their father, the plan probably would not work. And so, will they remember that in their reincarnation? They don't. While incarnate, they're not going to remember this. But the sentiments, that states of the spirit, will remain. Will be one of those cases in which sons or daughters say, I can't stand my father. I don't know why, but I just can't stand him. Something very bad about this guy. Don't know why, but you, as a spirit, you have that sentiment. And the goal of Silas in this story, chapter 10, that I'm going to read, is to reverse that situation. I know it's a long recap, but I think it's important for us to understand this chapter, especially because the reading will be a little bit longer than what I'd like. Any questions, any comment? right, so let's start.
Okay. Chapter 10, Understanding. After our routine chores the next evening, Sellers came looking for us to continue the task at hand. On our return to Luis's house, we talked casually, without mentioning the night before, since Clarendo and Leonel were turned into our mental wave of mutual respect. They greeted us with discretion and warmth. Both of them seemed to have been strongly affected by the ideas the assistant had indirectly offended their minds. The picture was still the same inside the house. Luis and his friends were chatting cordially, commenting on the plagues in the fields, animal diseases, the cost of living, and failed businesses. However, the two brothers clearly demonstrated their detachment from such a gloomy picture. They greeted us with growing kindness, as if they felt comfortable with our being there, and they eyed Silas with unusual interest. It seemed clear that they had used the assistant's confession as a basis for invaluable reflections.
Okay, thanks. So just quickly in chapter 9, as Andre Silas present his own case in of his previous incarnation, in where he was so greedy, so selfish, and that's what Andre is talking about here now. That the story of Silas somewhat help already to soften the hearts of those two individuals. And those two individuals, Clarence and Leonel, when they met Silas for the first time in chapter 9, it was with a tremendous amount of suspicious, thinking that perhaps they want to interfere with the plans of torment Luis and take what they believe is their right to have with all the fortune that was stolen for him, from them. But with this Silas' story and his honesty and his humility, it kind of already softened the hearts of those two individuals and helped them to be more comfortable and trust Silas, Andre Luiz, and Hilario. And I think it's important for us to note here the point that Andre Luiz always brings the point that how harmful it is when we stress only on the negative of the news, of when we meet someone, we stress, oh, the person talks so loud, but forget to talking about the message. The message is good. Speak loud. It's not nice, but the message. When we stress only on the negative of things, it may be a sign of some lower spiritual influences. It's something for us to watch ourselves, of course, when we stress the negative and allow ourselves to become pessimist, to become to refrain to act on doing something good because everything is bad, the neighbors are bad, the situation is bad, the word go is everything is going to hell. Is if we're allowing ourselves to keep a state of mind like that, perhaps it's a good sign that there is somebody contributing for it. So when they go back, André Luiz, Hilario, and Silas to meet Clarence and Leonel, they don't receive them without suspicion at least, but actually were welcoming state of mind. And we see over here that even a little bit of good attention of stories of the story of Silas is a seed that has the potential of growth. Naturally, you have to provide the water and the fertilizer for that seed, and the water and the fertilizer exactly what Silas is going to do now in this chapter for those two brothers. You can keep going.
Okay. Noticing their metamorphosis with unmistakable satisfaction, our expedition leader didn't even mention Luis's problem and cordially invited them to join us. Displaying the renewal that had come over them, they promptly joined our small group. And at Sila's suggestion, the two brothers joined hands with ours and were able to volatile rather easily and securely. A few minutes later, we arrived at a huge hospital in a business city on Earth. At the entrance, one of the spirit guards greeted Silas respectfully, and our guide introduced them. This is our friend and colleague, Ludivino. He is in charge of watching over a number of patients whose reincarnation is being prepared by our institution. We embraced each other fraternally. The assistant asked Ludivino, "How's our sister Laudemira? We received some bad news about her today." "Yes," confirmed the guard. "It looks like the poor woman will have to undergo a dangerous operation." Enveloped in the anesthetizing fluid hurled at her by her persecutors during sleep, the life in her womb has been badly harmed by extreme apathy. The surgery will return within the hour, and if other treatments don't work, he will have to give her a C-section. Our friend revealed deep concern on his usual calm face and added, "That will result in serious harm in the future. According to what is planned for her, she will have to receive 3 more children into a home in order to utilize her current human experience as effectively as possible." With a gesture of respect, the guard stated, "Then I don't think there's any time to waste." Silas took us inside and led us to a small ward where a young girl was complaining in pain. A sympathetic gray-haired woman whose tenderness led us to believe she was the mother was her bedside, stroking her restless hands. I could see the expression of fear in the patient's tear-filled eyes, so I asked Silas about the cause of such agonizing suffering. "Our sister," he explained, "will be a mother again in the next few minutes. However, she is bound to difficult trials. She was a mensal pass for a long time before returning to the physical body. She was constantly hounded by enemies that she created for herself in the past, when she used her physical beauty to act as an accomplice in crime. A beautiful woman, she influenced political decisions that ruined the lives of a lot of people. She suffered many years in the infernal darkness until she finally earned the blessing of reincarnating with the task of renewing herself by renewing a few of her partners in cruelty. They will be her children and will grow spiritually with her in a far-reaching regenerative endeavor." Silas gave me a significant look and added, "We'll talk about her story later, but right now we need to get to work." As a surprise, Clarino and Leonel looked on. The assistant asked Geraldo and me to join him in the task at hand. He told us both to pray, placed his right hand on the patient's head, and began applying magnetic procedures with the purpose of stimulating the uterus. A milky white substance like a thin mist radiated from his hands and spread over the entire genital area. After a few minutes of heavy expectation, the contractions began, gradually getting more intense. Silas carefully controlled the progress of delivery until the doctor arrived. Unable to register our presence, he smiled happily and called the nurse to assist him. The C-section was canceled. The assistant invited us to leave, informing us more calmly. Almeida's organism responded wonderfully. Let's hope she can continue her work with the success she needs. We set out again. Lionel's sharp mind didn't miss our slightest movement, and with an air of respect, he asked Silas if the work to which he was devoting himself entailed some sort of preparation for the future. The assistant answered promptly, "Yes, it does. Just yesterday, I told you about my wrongs as a doctor, which in actuality I never was, and I commented on my plans to study medicine again in the future, with our incarnate brothers and sisters. But in order to deserve the happiness of such an opportunity, I have been devoting myself to administrating relief in the lower regions that serve as my home, thereby creating beneficial courses for my future work to come. Courses? What courses? Asked Clarendo, somewhat surprised. By endeavoring to willingly help beyond the duties imposed on me in my struggle for moral regeneration. The divine blessing will enable me to expand the sowing of sympathy in my favor. Giving us a meaningful look after a brief moment of reflection, he continued, according to the debts I still have to pay, I'll be returning to the physical rim someday, and in order to right my wrongs, I myself will have to endure obstacles in doubt, sickness, and affliction. May charitable and kind hands help me from here in God's name, because no one can succeed alone. And if loving arms are to open up to me later, I have to use my right now in the willing exercise of solidarity. The teaching was invaluable, but not only for the two perplexed persecutors, but for us too, as we recognize once again the unbounded goodness of the Supreme Lord, who, even in the most dreadful corners of darkness, allows us to work for the insensate expansion of the good as the blessed price of our happiness. As we were volatilizing back, Hilaro anticipated my curiosity and steered the conversation to Laomida's case.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so in the evening when they go back to Louis' homes to meet Clarencio and Leonel, they have to also go to a big hospital where a woman was at labor, very difficult labor, secondary to negative energies from the spiritual world that was trying to harm the woman. But the woman had already been assisted, being rescued through Monson Pass, and was, after spending some time over there, as we're going to see soon, he was given the opportunity of reincarnation to start the process of reparation and repair of herself in the process of assisting the reparation of others associated in previous crimes of previous reincarnations. We see here the cascade effect in which, in order for us to progress, to repair our own mistakes, we need to put ourselves at service of others, not only others that we harmed directly, but others that are harmed indirectly, as by making association to commit crimes. And again, crimes here against the divine laws may or may not be seen as crimes by our human laws, okay? And that's the case of this woman. And of note, we have to see here how the assistance continues, not limited for the time and when those spirits are in that institution, Mansão Pass. But once those spirits also reincarnate, they continue to receive assistance. They, as we study very often, the questions comes, we all of us have our guardian angel, right? Our spiritual guide, the one that is who took responsibility to be our assistants directly. But there is many other assistants, so the spirits are helping us. And those works of Mansão Paz would be one of those assistants, not necessarily the guardian angel, the protecting spirit, but there to help this woman, and they are there working on her behalf, helping her to fulfill that plan to the best. And I've noticed you see here that it is a plan. It is intention of created opportunities that helps everybody, but it's not written in stone. It's not determinism at all, because what's happening with this woman was not in the plan. It was not in the plan. They should have very difficult deliveries that should be exposed to the necessity of C-sections. On the contrary, those things could harm that plan, could put this plan to fail, because there are other forces that are trying to impede, to stop that plan to proceed, to go ahead. We see here that if the plans that are made for us in our reincarnation, with or without our participation, hopefully most of us now with our participation, there will be no setbacks. If was like this determined that you're going to pass through this and you're not going to pass through that, there will be no setbacks, and perhaps you'll live in a much better world than we live today. But unfortunately, it's not like that, because there are forces that works against the plan, and very often those forces are ourselves who go against the plans that was established for us, and we do not realize, do not accomplished what would be for our own benefit. And this woman is a good example of that. Like, there is no determinism. There is a blueprint, just like when you're a student, you receive a syllabus in the beginning of the semester that allows what we are ought to accomplish to be successful in each one of the courses that we are taking. But very often, laziness, other things happens, and we are not able to accomplish that syllabus, and we may fail a course, or we do not get as much as we could out of those courses. And this woman is a very clear case of that. So of note, I think it's important for us to see here that although there are plans for Olympio, there are plans for Silas, there are plans for Clarencio, they could fail if we don't apply, if we don't work to overcome all the forces that may oppose that plan. It requires discipline, it requires goodwill, it requires tolerance, and all kinds of good things for us to be successful. And again, this case being presented of this woman is not just by chance. It's another example in order to assist those two brothers, that it is through hard work, it's through freeing ourselves of our selfishness that we can accomplish good things in life. And Silas is doing that, showing those two brothers, right, through his own example. And again, bring the case here that one of his failures in previous incarnation was not use his talent as a doctor. Have the talent, went to medical school, graduated, but selfishness, greed stopped him for applying the talent. If you go to the story of the talents that Jesus tell, he was the one who received one coin and buried it. And now he's having the opportunity of starting his preparation for be a doctor in the next reincarnation, even before he incarnate, assisting incarnate with their medical difficulties. Any questions? Okay, so let's continue.
Okay. Was she an old acquaintance of Silas? How had she assumed such grave commitments involving motherhood? What role would her children play? Were they her creditors or her debtors? Silas smiled complacently at this volley of questions and explained, I have no doubt that our friend's redemptive process fits in very nicely with your studies on the law of cause and effect. He paused at length to consult his memory and then proceeded. We cannot all of a sudden go into a lot of detail about Laumida's past, nor can I commit any discretion that might betray the trust that Mansawa has granted me for carrying out my obligations. However, for the sake of our spiritual edification, I can tell you that Laumida's present suffering is the consequences of heavy debts she contracted a little over 5 centuries ago. At that time, she was a woman of high standing in the court of Joanna II, Queen of Naples, from 1414 to 1435. She had 2 brothers that supported all her insane plans of vanity and power. She got married, but realizing that her husband was an obstacle to the irresponsible behavior that marked her character, she forced him to face the daggers of her 2 minions, thus causing his death. As a widow and owner of a considerable fortune, her prestige grew for having favored the Queen's remarriage. Joanna, the widow of William, Duke of Australia, married James of Bamboa, court of La Mancha. From then on, she was even more closely associated with the Queen's affairs, and she surrendered to pleasures and debauchery, corrupting the behavior of a lot of good men and reckoning the worthy homes of several women. She scorned the sacred opportunities for education and beneficence offered to her by the heavenly goodness, and used her precarious status as a noble to lose herself in recklessness and crime. Thus, when she discarnated at the peak of material opulence in the middle of the 15th century, she fell into the horrendous infernal depths, where she suffered the persecution of fierce enemies who have not forgiven her for her crimes and desertions. She suffered for over 100 years in thick darkness, with her mind still fixated on her delusions, and she returned to the flesh 4 times due to the intercession of friends from the higher realms. She reincarnated with excruciating expiatory problems in which, as a woman with new commitments, she experienced awful shame and humiliation at the hands of unscrupulous men who suffocated all her dreams. But as Hilario, each time she left her body after 4 lives, was she still hooked to the darkness? Why wouldn't she be? Replied the assistants. When the fall into the abyss lasts for such a long time, no one could get out with only 1 leap. She entered in through the door of the grave and left it through the door of the cradle, bringing along inner maladjustments, and she was unable to resolve from one time to the next. If she was so resistant to change, asked my colleague, what was the point of her reincarnating? Wouldn't it be enough for her to suffer a dolorous purgation here on this side without having to reincarnate in the corporeal realm? Your question is quite understandable, replied Silas patiently. However, with the support of dedicated friends, our sister returned to pay her debts and installations, reuniting with reincarnated creditors, albeit still yoked to the lower planes. The blessing of temporary forgetfulness enabled her to obtain an invaluable renewal of her strength. But did she manage to pay at least some of the debts she had accumulated? Yes, to a certain extent, because she suffered tremendous blows to the pride crystallized in her heart. But she acquired new debt at the same time because, on certain occasions, she could not overcome her instinctive aversion toward the enemies to whom she owed her work and obedience. She even went to the extreme of drowning a small child who had barely taken his first steps so that she could afflict the woman of the house where she was serving as a nanny, seeking revenge for cruelties inflicted on her. After each disincarnation, she returned to her usual place in the purgatorial zones with a little credit to her account, but without any of the virtues needed for final liberation from the darkness. It seems that we always put off our decisions to pay off our debts. Even so, continued Hilario, whenever she returned to the spirit world, she must have had help from the benefactors who were endearing to restrain her excesses. Of course she did, confirmed Silas. No one is condemned to abandonment. You're fully aware that God helps people through other people. Everything belongs to God. Even hell? Asked Lionel, worried. The assistant smiled and clarified. Actually, hell is our own doing, generally our own. But let's imagine it as being an unworthy and clamorous construction on the terrain of life, which is God's creation.
Thanks. So we see here that how things are placed together in order to fulfill multiple objectives at the same time. Of course, we need to take advantage of all those opportunities, but when we do so, what we see here is how many individuals are being assisted or have the opportunity of being assisted if they use the opportunity through one event. It is Sila's responsibility to continue to assist this now incarnated woman with her medical difficulties to provide the necessary energies to carry on with her plan of receiving accomplice colleagues of crimes of the past, giving them the opportunity of a reincarnation, start the process of reparation, continue the process of reparation, and at the same time serve as an example of the woman and the example also of Silas, what Sila is doing, to Leonel and Clarindo, and of course the learning opportunities to Hilario and Andre Luiz, learning opportunity that Andre Luiz now exposes us as readers of this book. So to one event, to one single thing that happened to that Sila is doing to this woman, how many people benefits from it, including us. It is amazing how the forces of good work to spread goodness. But of course, we can take the horse to the water, but we cannot make it drink, right? And the example of this woman that in the past was associated with the court of Queen Joanna II. That's not really important, but just shows over here that we accumulate debits more or less serious with the divine laws. And again, those debts that would be considered crime against laws may not be considered crime in accordance with our man-made laws. And those are cumulative. And we need to adjust ourselves to every error. So when we see the divine justice prevails, eventually and certainly, we cannot put a time, we cannot put an intensity to which the law will act, because the objective of the law, of the justice, is not to punish, but to educate. It's not to create hell for individuals, but to eliminate the hell from the individuals, right? And it takes time. And this woman is a very good example. And keep in mind that Leonel and Clarindo are listening to this. And as we do very often, we have a tendency to put ourselves in the shoes of the individual that in the case being presented, right? So they are putting themselves in their shoes and the seeing and the witnessing the difficulties that we placed ourselves upon when we stick to the wrongdoing. This woman had already been, the spirit had already been rescued, which means that she had a very minimum necessary to start to receive assistance, has had multiple reincarnations since then, has had started that process of reparation, but it's a long process. It's a long process because she still carry in her those sentiments that makes her not very resistant to some temptations that we meet along the way, that makes her surrender to some of the evil devices that you all going to receive during our incarnation. Have take some bad decisions in those reincarnations. So although she's progressing, it's like that story that you move 4 steps forward and take 1 step or 2 steps down, right? It's still progressing, but not the progress that would be ideal, because again, we are quite weak and we are individuals of a habit. We stick to some habits and it's hard to get rid of them because we surrender to temptations, because we still have still some ill sentiments that persists to stay and we surrender to them. And this woman is a very good example of that. So in all the discussion, especially Hilario asking all those questions, the point is that she starts her process. Could it be faster? She could be reach that peace of conscience faster? Yeah, it could. But she is an average dude who do that like ourselves. And we surrender to our temptations. She even committed a crime of a child over here, just as an example, in this process of reparation. I remember an interview that is in the book Heaven and Hell, in which they receive the spirit that is the process of regeneration. There was a serial killer, so to say, in the past, and now does not have a desire to kill or stop killing. In the previous incarnation was able to go a whole entire incarnation without killing anyone. And one of the questions that was placed to that spirit was that, well, you had such a huge change in your life. You were such a good person in relation to what we see of your past over here. And we had such a short temper that we would act aggressively and violently towards anything disagreeable to you. What if one of us would start to offend you right now? And his answer was, please don't push it. I am doing my best, but there is reside a beast inside of me. I have made all the changes, but I would prefer if no one would tempt it like that.
Mm.
And pretty much that is the case of this woman, or the case of us. We're trying to free ourselves of those things that does not come out so easy. And she serves us here as a tremendous example, doing her best, going back and forth from reincarnation back to Mason Peace to continue process of reparation, not being able to go anywhere elevated than the Mason Peace, again, is in the lower zone, but not bad enough to go back to the lower zone without the assistance of Mason Peace. So definitely making progress for what she was, but a progress that is still quite slow, because for most of us, progress is slow. And Ilaria asked again, but with all this, you should continue to receive assistance? I said, yes, of course. Know that divine benevolence never ceases to assist, never gives hope, gives up, never loses hope. And everyone is assisted regardless. And Lionel, very impressed with the story. He's asked, well, everybody receives all this kind of assistance, even in hell? To which Silas respond, yes, because in actuality, hell is our own doing. Hell is indeed a state of mind, and that state of mind generates the hell in us and around us, because then we associated our energies with all those negative energies. Any question, any comment? All right, let's continue.
Yes. Having misused our minds and knowledge to generate such a monster in divine space, it is our duty to destroy it in order to build heaven in the same place that hell now unduly occupies. To do so, the Heavenly Father's infinite love helps us in many ways so that perfect justice manifests itself. Understand? The explanation could not have been clearer. Nevertheless, Eladio seemed bent on having all his questions answered, so perhaps that is why he asked further. Do you think we can find out about Laomedia's lives before her reincarnation in the court of Joanna the Second? Yes, answered Silas tolerantly. That would be easy enough, but it wouldn't be advisable in our simple study because the subject would take a large amount of time and effort. It is enough to study the past situation we've been talking about in order to define her present redemptive struggles. Our learning experiences in any social standing, whether in the field of influence or finances, culture, ideas, serve as living reference points for our worthy and unworthy behavior when temporarily using the abilities that the abilities that the Lord has loaned us by means of virtues acquired or depths assumed. They clearly indicate our progress in the direction of the light or our greater or lesser imprisonment in the circles of the darkness. Sila's illuminating explanation was true burst of sunlight for our comprehension. Even so, my companion insisted. Notwithstanding your valuable explanation so far regarding memory in the lower regions, it would be interesting to know whether or not, before her present reincarnation, Almeida's accurately recalled the stages she had gone through during the difficult trials you mentioned. Our friend clarified with enormous patience. I have lived at Mansawa for 40 years and have monitored her case for exactly 30. She finished up her latest existence in the physical realm at the beginning of this century and had endured awful suffering in the lowest zones. She arrived at our institute terribly demented, and under hypnosis, she revealed the facts I have just told you, and which are included in a personality file. Our instructors, however, didn't think that a more in-depth memory regression was necessary in order to assist her, at least for the time being. But I knew that as troubled as she was, Laomidas didn't have the strength to articulate any reminiscences while awake, especially because under the auspices of benefactors who supervise our organization, she had been led to her present reincarnation while still mentally attuned to the unworthy connections of the path she had chosen. This time, in a long and blessed condition as their mother, she must accept 5 former accomplices in her moral downfall in order to guide their sentiments toward the light. To finally free herself from the darkness that still taints her spirit, she will have to succeed in her present reincarnation because the fruits she hopes to reap in the future depend on it. If she manages to graduate 5 souls from the school of the good, she will have won a huge prize before the loving and just law. Our discussion of Laumida's case on our way back represented an invaluable contribution to our study of the topic, cause and effect.
Thanks. So naturally, when a case like that is presented to us, in the case of Vladimira, that once was a pretty mean individual in the court of Joanna II, and that going back to the year 1414 to the 15 something, right? I mean, talking about centuries back. And this woman is still working on reparations, on progress of herself and all those associated with her case. In the 1940s, when this book was written. And again, those stories presented by Andre Luiz, they are real stories that happened. The name is may be changed to protect, of course, the incarnate. But those are things that really happened to individuals. These are not fiction, um, invented stories by Andre Luiz. And we have questions. Naturally, I mean, I have some questions regarding this story. I'm sure each one of you who is paying attention has their own questions. And of course, Hilario, Andre Luiz had the questions. But Silas reminds us that we need to be objective. We have a purpose of demonstrating this case. And we need to stick to that purpose, because if we start answering all the questions, seeking the answer for the questions that arises naturally from the story itself, we get lost, and we lose our point. We lose our track, the objective that we're trying to reach. And Silas kind of put a limit of the questions that will be answered by him, saying that what we need to know is this, for what is important for us. We could investigate her past. We could investigate and her past before or that reincarnation in the court of the 1 second, but that would not be contribute for our objectives here now. And Hilario is persistent, right? Perhaps it would be good to know if she remembered anything that happened to her before. And Silas again being a good point, saying, I have lived at Measure for 40 years and I have monitored her case for exactly 30 years. So he knows the case. He's working with her. He knows of all her previous reincarnations prior to this one, living Manson, reincarnating, doing her things, committing new mistakes, getting some things right, and come back to the spiritual world, coming back, accepted back in Manson Pass for 4 reincarnations already. And some of the things that she's going to, some of plans of previous reincarnation as this present one, when she's up to receive 5 of her accomplices of the past as sons and daughters, not everything is revealed for her on that plan. Some of the things she don't even know they're supposed to have, because she's not able yet even participate in the complete plans. Then he says, Laudemira didn't have the strength to articulate any reminiscences while awake, especially because under the auspices of the benefactor who supervised our organization, she had been led to her present reincarnation while still mentally attuned to the unworth connection of the path she had chosen. Now imagine things that happened centuries ago, after multiple reincarnations, and she's still mentally attuned to unworth connections. How difficult it is to really get rid of those things. And we say difficult it is because we don't let them go. Okay, because if we apply ourselves, if you were very strong, desire for change, we could do that much faster. But unfortunately, most of us, the average individual, seeks to hold some of things back or do not have that enough energy to counteract those kinds of unworth connections. And it is her responsibility to create that disconnection herself. Because can't they just cut those ties themselves? No. We have the intelligence, we have the free will, and we have the conscience for us to work and create that liberation ourselves. How long it takes is up to ourselves. And again, how smart this process is of using this example, this case in which he is working strongly to assist Laudemiras. In the process, he is assisting Clarence and Leonel, helping him to think a bit of what they are doing or what they could be doing better. Serves as an example, teaching Andre Luiz and Hilario, and Andre Luiz is passing all this opportunity of learning to all of us who are reading this book. No questions? Let us continue.
Well, sorry. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but so Laudemira, she after this incarnation in 1414, so she came back about 4 or 5 times, and in none of them she progressed, correct?
No, she
And
progressed.
oh, she progressed a little bit.
Yeah, she
Okay.
progressed. Yes.
Okay, because I misunderstood. So because I understood, for me it was like she was still in the same mentality of from the past, and then now she's kind of waking up. Let's say that, I don't know if I can say this, but she's waking up to the reality, and then now she wants to receive those who she kind of oh, I forgot the word. She made mistake with in the past, so now she can repair with having those souls as his her children. Correct?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. She has made progress. The point that Silas is making here is that for the point that she was already rescued from the lower zones outside of Mansan Paz, accepted into Mansan Paz, it's already in itself a sign of progress. That she progressed from when she arrived in that lower zone. The time she spent there was a long time she spent there in the lower zone. He mentioned over here, but I forgot. The time that she spent in the lower zone to evolve, to progress enough to be able to be assisted in Mansão Pass, which
I see.
already itself progress. And then in Mansão Pass, she needs to progress quite a bit to have conditions to reincarnate to assist her accomplices in crime of the past.
I
Because
see.
if she's still the same ignorant person, should not have the potential to help those in reincarnations. The thing is, once we reincarnate and we get associated with the flesh again, we get associated with the temptations that the flesh imposes upon us, sensuality, material acquisitions, social status, and all those things. We fell in some of the plans because we surrendered to some of those temptations. So let's say if the plan was, of a plan that it would be to accomplish 100% of it, she was able to accomplish, let's say, 65. Because in some things that she was supposed to move on, she had a setback. But overall, there was more gain than loss. Overall, she moved up, not as much as she could, because of the temptations, because all the word that he used here, there's the association that she still established of individuals who are really delaying their own progress. She is moving up, very slowly, and when she goes back to the spiritual world, she already gained the right to go straight to Mansão Pass and doesn't fall back in the lower zones completely lost again, which is a sign of progress in itself. What Silas is demonstrating is that progress is slow for most of us because there are forces that counterbalance all the plans that is made to us to progress. And very often those forces is ourselves who resist change. We're very resistant to change most of the time. But she is progressing so much so that she's being able to assist other spirits in the process of reparation. Not as fast as it could be, but let's say, instead of getting 100%, she's getting 65% and wasting 45% of the opportunities, which is a positive instead of a negative. It could be a negative. She could fail completely, a whole incarnation, and return to the spiritual with even more debit and in such a bad shape that could not even be able to be helped at Mansão Pass, which is not happening. So she is progressing, but really at a pace that could have been a lot better. Does it make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's move.
Okay. Realizing that our curiosity had been satisfied, Silas turned more attentively to Lionel and Clarendo to prove their thoughts. Undoubtedly, in order to discover their hopes, Silas referred to his own eagerness regarding his medical work in the future. He had no intention of wasting any time. He now had a thirst for learning and serving that would enable him to return to the earth with better spiritual qualities, which would be expressed in his mind when incarnate, in the form of inclinations and abilities in his so-called inborn vocation. The two brothers had been profoundly touched by the words of the friend who had won their trust, and they now felt much more at ease. The assistant's confession and the example of humility had been willingly shown us and affected them deeply. Impulsive and frank, Clarendo talked about the thoughts that had inflamed him years before. He loved the land passionately, and when he was younger, he had planned an agricultural organization where he would be able to devote himself to ennobling experiments. He would have loved to live for a long time on the family property, creating an area of personal work. However, he stated somewhat sadly, but without the tone of his former rebelliousness, Antonio Olimpio's criminal decision had shattered all his dreams. He saw himself stripped of his ideals and greatly frustrated, which, after the grave, drove him out of his mind. He couldn't find the mental disposition to rebuild his hopes. He felt like despair itself, like someone irredeemably tied to a degrading whipping post. Clorindo now displayed a trace of lamentation in his voice, showing himself immensely transformed. Encouraged by Silas, Lionel, whose refined intelligence inspired us with cautious respect, started talking about his fondness of music. When he was a boy, he believes he was cut out for the sublime art. As an adolescent, he fell in love with Beethoven and knew his biography by heart. Consequently, he had hoped not only to work on his bachelor's degree, but also to earn accolades as a pianist, which would have made him intensely happy. However, his voice expressed unbearable bitterness. Being murdered had clouded his vision. Inside, he now harbored only the hatred that had come to rule his existence, and with such hate in his heart, he was unable to reconstruct his earlier dreams. Donnell paused at length and then remarked, to our pleasant surprise, "But during our fellowship over the last few days, I have begun to realize that if our physical existence was cut short in the fullness of our youth, we must have had depths that justify such a dreadful ordeal. Just the same, that doesn't excuse our ungrateful brother Antonio from his guilt. He's still responsible for the horrible murder with which he cast us into darkness." "Exactly," added Silas emotionally. "Your argument reveals enormous renewal." The assistant was unable to continue because Lionel put his head in his hands and it complained in tears.
Thanks.
Okay.
So you see here now, as I said in the beginning, that Silas had failed in his previous incarnation of use his talent, and declined the opportunity of exercise his talent as a doctor of medicine out of greed, because he need to pay attention to his father's wealth. But now I have understood that is his talent, that is something that he can really be a good instrument at the hands of the good spirits to assist many other individuals. He is using the opportunity now to sharpen his skills as a doctor, yet in the spiritual world, in preparation to be the best possible professional or humanizer in the coming reincarnation, in which he seeks now to become once again a doctor, which will be with tremendous difficulty, as opposed to the previous reincarnation. It was very easy for him to be a doctor. And maybe one of the factors, because it was so easy for him to become a doctor, he didn't put much importance to it. But it says something here, and there is something here that is important for us to know. He now had a thirst for learning, talking about Silas. He now had a thirst for learning and serving that would enable him to return to earth with better spiritual qualities, which would be expressed in his mind when incarnate in the form of inclination and abilities in the so-called inborn vocations. I find that very interesting that we may see in ourselves, we may see in others, we may see in our children, that individuals seems to have a easiness to certain topic of studies, to have a certain tendency to be good at some things. No, you see some kids with tremendous ability of putting puzzles together, of putting things together that perhaps is a tendency to the world of engineering, perhaps. Some other has tremendous curiosity of break things apart just to put them back together. Some other has a tremendous curiosity towards the biology or towards the human body. And we can see here that very often those things are things that you bring already from the spiritual world. It has to be, right? Because the kids, they need to have the opportunity of developing any kind of skills yet, but they already show the talent, so some skills that is somewhat above average for that age group, that we can already prepare ourselves. Not only things that we acquired from previous incarnations, but while in the spiritual world, we start working, preparing ourselves to put our best talents to work, and it may be expressed as what so-called inborn vocations. I think that was a very interesting comment. And we see here that this example of Silas regarding his medical skills brought to memory for Clarindo and Leonel their own desires of being something more than rich men on that previous incarnation when they were murdered. That Clarindo had these goals, that ideas, that talent for working the land. He wanted to get into some kind of research on how to make the land more productive outside of gaining wealth, but of putting those talents to work, right? And Leonel had that desire, that likeness, that intention to get into music. He was a great appreciator of classical, who had studied Beethoven, learned his biography by heart, and had the intention to also become a pianist, following Beethoven's steps, so to say. And all that was shattered by the crime committed by his older brother. And then they come to the realization of how much time was wasted seeking revenge. How they become really prisoners of their own hate and desire for retaliation. How they become prisoners of the intention of getting back what belonged to them, what they believed belonged to them, which was their wealth that the brother kept for himself. And then they come to the realization that to begin with, that was not ours, but what was really ours is our talent, is our true goals and desire to put ourselves to work as workers of the land and the Clarind, and the ones that work of the fine arts, as in kind of Leonel, that these are really things that would bring them the kind of happiness that we all want, not as much as the wealth. That by seeking retaliation, seeking the illusion of getting what belonged to them, they wasted so much time. And here they come to express them that what they have reached finally, as we're going to read now and try to finish the chapter.
Okay. Dear God, why do we discover the lofty virtue of forgiveness only after we have already stained ourselves in crime? Why does it take so long for us to want to restore the fuel of our aspirations when revenge has already burned our life in the fires of hell, of evil? As Clarendo followed in his explosion of pain and in remorse with signs of approval, and as Silas embraced him kindly, we had the intuition that Lionel was referring to Alcia's death due to the obsession that obviously had been provoked by him and his brother. Silas promptly consoled him. Weep, my friend, weep, because tears purify the heart. But even so, don't let your tears suffocate the seedlings of hope, which of us here can say he has no guilt. We all have wrongs to redeem, and the Lord's treasury never runs short on compassion. Time is our blessing. We have congealed the darkness around us, and with time we will change it into supplemented light. But to do so, we must persevere in courage and humility, in love and sacrifice. Let us grow in the direction of the future, determined to reconstruct our destinies.
Okay?
We could see that Lenore wanted to pour his heart out to us. He wanted to burn himself to confess, leading him back to reflection. However, Silas invited us to leave and promised to return the next evening. Completely changed, the two brothers went back to Luis's house while we headed back to Mansal Pass. On the way, the assistant rejoiced. The Antonio Opolimpo case entrusted to us was proceeding well. The obsessor's renewal had been crowned with success. Silas stated that the meeting of understanding between Alcia and those who would be her children in the future would take place in the next evening. After that, the two brothers would be admitted to Mansal on their own free will to start preparing for the future at the institute supervised by Druso. They will work with re-educate themselves, finding new mental interests and new stimuli for their recovery. Once Silas had finished, Hilario asked, very concerned, how much time will Clarindo and Lionel need to smooth the way for their return to the physical body? Probably a quarter of a century. Why so long? They will need to reconstitute their ideas in the field of the good and mold them indelibly in their minds in order to dedicate themselves effectively to their new plans. They will take refuge in active work, helping others, and thus creating invaluable seeds of sympathy that will help them in their earthly struggles tomorrow. While working and studying, as well as while being involved in the enterprises of the purest fraternity, they will amass incorruptibly moral qualities, and such a re-education will improve their tendencies, redisposing them to the victory they need in their redemptive trials. What about Antonio Polimpo? Insisted Hilario. As far as I can tell, he will have a much shorter stay at Mansal. That's right, confirmed the assistants. After a quick reconciliation with his two brothers, Antonio will most probably reincarnate within 2 or 3 years. Why such a big difference? We mustn't forget, explained Silas patiently, that it was Antonio who began the criminal drama in the first place. Consequently, out of the group that is reincarnating, he'll be the one that is least favored by the Lord during his stay in the human realm. Due to the aggravating circumstances that marked his individual case, with his spirit still darkened by anguish and remorse, he will be born into the family he harmed through his greediness. He'll live within a very narrow mental horizon, since instinctively His primary concern will be to give back to his brothers the physical existence, money, and land he stole from them. As a result, he'll only have the inner resources for his self-education and spiritual growth after he reaches middle age, and only after he has set his children on the road to triumph they are supposed to achieve. Be that is as it may, said Hilario, Lorenzo and Leonor are also murderers. They shall pay for it, but we can't overlook the mitigating circumstances in their regrettable crime. Antonio Coley planned this crime in order to enjoy the material advantages that would come his way through cruelty and violence, whereas the two unfortunate brothers acted in the nightmare of hatred, traumatized by horrific pain. No doubt, Clorinda and Lenore have suffered anguish and remorse, and they'll have to endure a dolorous redemption when the time is right. But even so, they are creditors of the brother who delayed their evolutionary progress. What about Alicia? In all this, she has managed to accumulate enough love to understand, forgive, and assist. Thus, she has acquired the right before the Lord to help not only her husband, but also her two unfortunate brothers-in-law, her still incarnate son Luis, and all the descendants of her family circle. Because the purer the love in the spirit, the more resources the soul has before God. And giving us a meaningful look, he emphasized, those who really know how to love govern life. I was satisfied the concepts couldn't have been any clearer. Hilario, however, apologized for his insistence and raised yet another question. Why did Alicia have to go through the afflictive discarnation in the lake? Silas replied, concerning that our sister has already earned the happiness of unconditional forgiveness, the offspring of love that does not concern itself with being loved in return, it wouldn't be advisable to delve any deeper in the past. That would make our study too facetious. And he added, smiling, Alicia already has a broad strip of heaven in her heart, so matters related to her should be analyzed in heaven. We arrived at Mansawa, and each of us began to digest the lesson we had just learned. The examples of love and hate, suffering and revenge from the Antonio Opolimpo case were the same as our own stories, highlighting the need for love and forgiveness in our lives. It would be through the purity of our sentiments that we would proceed from the darkness to the light. With these serious thoughts in mind, we eagerly awaited the next evening. When the blessed time for our lesson arrived, the assistant had a long private talk with Sister Alicia, asking her to meet us at a set time at the lake where she had discarnated. He then asked two co-workers to go with her and told them that Alicia should come to us only when called. After the usual trip, we entered Luis's home, where Clarindo and Leonel were waiting for us with warm attention. Silas took us back to the hospital we had visited the day before and administered magnetic passes to La Rodmira and her newborn son. When he had finished these quick tasks, he took us to an enormous house where an admirable, discarnate old man greeted us kindly. This is our brother Polino. He had been suffering his son's work as an engineer, explained the assistant. Polino led us inside to a large study where a middle-aged man was hunched over a book.
Okay, thanks. So we went over a little bit. We still have maybe another 5 minutes to complete. I will ask you for your time a little bit extra if possible, so I can finish the chapter. If anyone needs to leave, I totally understand. But at this point, we see over here that the examples of Silas of himself, of that woman who was in labor, their experience in previous existence, their work in reparation, even with all the difficulties, and especially the example of Silas to recover from his own greed and selfishness to become a selfless individual, and to have the opportunity to realize, to put to work his talent as a medical doctor in next reincarnation, and participate in the process of helping Aida, her mother, her stepmother, that he was responsible for her death somehow, and his father, that he corrupted with his own ingredient selfishness and caused him to poison Aida. That's all that needed for Leonel and Clarindo to break out of the cycle of seeking revenge, and was able to think of themselves more than to think of the criminals. And they came to the realization that they were wasting the time, and they are now looking the opportunity of move on with their own existence, which is a tremendous success at a short time. Through all the examples that we've seen over here, see that it's going to be a challenge also for the two of them. It's not just because they now realize that they want to make a change, that this change will happen automatically. They will be admitted to Thomas and Pass. They will go to perhaps some special treatment. They will have the opportunity to start practicing charity in accordance to their abilities and incrementing it slowly, working over there prior to that reincarnation, in which there will be the sons of Alzira and Olympio. Olympio was the murderer of them in the past. It shows over here that, as I said before, Olympio is not in good shape at all. He's still kept pretty much in a state of hibernation, so to say, sleeping in the spiritual world. And his debts are so great that he will not participate much in that process of the plan for the next reincarnation. He will attune while incarnate severely for his crime. He will receive Alzira as a wife, to be the mother of those two, Clarinda and Leonel. And the case of Alzira, one of the questions was, why did she have to go to that sacrifice of that murdered? And Sila said, well, the case of Alzira is different. A woman who had already learned to love without expecting being loved in return is something of a heavenly kind of state of mind that is beyond us. That discussion is above them. I'm taking my own personal interpretation of this case, that I think that Alzira is one of the cases in which she offered herself to assist those individuals already, and if had to come to the point that they would cause some harm to her in that reincarnation, as happened, should kind of be okay with that. It was a small sacrifice for her to lose her physical life and return to the spiritual world perhaps a little earlier, because she is already above all those ill sentiments, and she's again placing herself with the sacrifice to come and assist those spirits. It's not going to be an easy reincarnation to them, because again, Olympio has a lot of work to do, and those two brothers, even though they are committed to start a new chapter in their lives, there will be challenges ahead. Going back to the example of the woman who was in the court of Joanna II in the past, who is progressing, but is also meeting challenges along the way. Not a free ride for anyone. And so now is the part that we're going to get Alzira and the two kids together. And hopefully to finish the next 5 minutes. And I thank you for staying this extra 15 minutes with us.
Okay. Our kind host introduced him as his incarnate son, whose technical mission he was watching over with unfaltering zeal. Asking Sila what he could do for us, Silas asked him to inspire his son to give us the pleasure of a few minutes of music, if possible, something special by Beethoven. To our surprise, our new friend approached the engineer and whispered something in his ear, completely unaware of our presence, and as if it had been his own idea to listen to some music. The gentleman put down his book, walked over to the record player, browsed a small collection, and took out Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. In a few moments, the room was filled with enchantment and joy, sonority and beauty. Silas listened with us in heart and soul to the marvelous symphony, all of it based on the blessings of sublimated nature. Together with Clarendo, who was attracted by activities related to the land, we mentally left the presence of the woods, filled with singing birds flying over a crystalline stream flowing over small milky pebbles, and as if the imaginary landscape were obeying the melancholy narration, we saw a sun transformation coming over it, giving us the impression that the formerly blue sky was now covered with heavy clouds, with thunder and lightning, only to return to the flowery scene amid candles and prayers. Along with Leonel, passionately in love with the divine art, we registered the power of the music in its supreme majesty as it lifted us to the most sublime emotions. Those minutes for us were like a blessed prayer. The different parts of the magnificent symphony led us upward in harmonious spirals of unknown beauty, and we all shed abundant tears because the magical chords had the ability to miraculously wash the innermost folds of our souls. When the music ended, we set out enraptured. Our thoughts vibrated in a pure atonement, and our hearts seemed more fraternal. At Lionel's request, which seemed to instinctively answer Sierra's mental suggestion, we headed for the lake on the Olympio's land. The full moon crowned the fields with silvery radiance. It was late at night. Lionel took the initiative and began telling us what we already knew. He broke into copious tears as he referred to the death of his sister-in-law, who had received the lance head of his rage. Hilario and I were surprised to see less patient attention to Lionel's confession, as if it were all new to him. After more than an hour of listening to our suffering companion, the assistant privately asked Hilario and I to be very understanding, explaining that our friend left the need to purge his wounded heart of all its pain, and that we didn't have the right to interrupt him even if we already knew about his inner tragedy. On the contrary, we...
Sorry.
We needed to help him fraternally, sharing his burden of affliction so that the wounds in his mind could be relieved. Immediately afterward, Silas involved the two brothers in an interesting conversation, proposing their readjustment by means of reparative trials. Didn't they want to get out again on the physical journey? Why not embrace a new endeavor by reincarnating into the same family from which they had come? Wouldn't it be more pleasant and easier to win reconciliation and thereby recover all of their former aspirations, progressing with them in the physical realm toward the precious steps that lead to the higher life? Almost simultaneously, however, Lionel and Clarendo bemoaned what had happened to Alzia. In fact, the desperation of their cause had led them to accept the suggestions of madness that they had spent long years practicing cruelty in the darkness. However, nothing pained them more than the violence that they had committed against Antonio, Olimpio's wife, who, terrified by their persecution, had thrown herself into those waters of dreadful memories. But what if Alcia herself were to bring them the embrace of understanding and help? And as they smiled with hope in the torrent of their own tears, the assistant left for a couple of minutes and returned with the generous sister. Dressed in a radiant garment, she offered them her hands and her maternal lap, resplendent with love. As if mortally wounded, Lionel and Clarendo fell to their knees, crushed with fear and joy. Alzira caressed their submissive heads and said in a moving tone, children of my soul, let us render thanks to God for his blessed hour. And because Lionel tried in vain to beg for her forgiveness, uttering monosyllables interrupted by sobs, Luis's mother pleaded humbly, I'm the one who should kneel down and implore your mercy. My husband's crime was mine as well. You were robbed of your dearest dreams when youth was just starting to smile upon you. Our riddled ambition robbed you of your resources and potential, including your lives. Forgive us. We shall pay our debts. The Lord will help our house to recover. Soon, Antonia and I will return to the physical realm, and with the support of divine mercy, we will give you back the land that isn't ours. Honor my soul with the privilege of becoming your loving mother. I'm offering you my heart to give you back your hopes and ideals. The Lord will grant me the blessing of sheltering you in my bosom, of raising you with the breath of my kisses and the dew of my tears. But to do so, the forgetfulness of our wrongs must be born pure from the love we owe each other. Let us forget resentments, and God will give us what we need to pay our debts. Stand up, beloved sons. Jesus knows that I wish to hold you to my heart and keep you in my arms. Alzia couldn't continue. Corporeous tears streamed down her face, and something seemed to stick her in her throat, suppressing her voice. Even so, in those few moments, we saw the glorious victory of love. Scintillating sparks emerged from Alzia's chest in successive waves of saffron blue, giving us the impression that her inner nobility had been transformed into a fountain of intense light. With her support, Clorindo and Leonel stood up like two children attracted by their mother's tenderness, and they embraced her with moving tears. Our friend caressed them gratefully and graciously, received them as holding two treasures of the heart. At a silent signal from Silas, we helped her as necessary, and after some time we took our two new friends to the Lodge Institute. After setting them in the appropriate department, Silas told us happily, thank God, our task is over. Now let's hope they will prepare themselves for the new battles on the earth, for redempting work in which affection and aversion, joy and pain, struggle and difficulties will all be mixed together. Various questions arising in my mind, but I understood that the law of cause and effect would act tirelessly on the characters in our story. That led me to think about our own depths. Instead of asking more questions, I respectfully kissed the assistant's hands in the condition of the student gratefully to his generous instructor. Turning to silent prayer, I thanked Jesus for the invaluable lesson I had received.
And there we come to the end of this beautiful chapter. I really thanks everyone who was able to give us extra time to complete. I pretty much knew we'd be able to do it in an hour and a half. It's a long chapter filled with wonderful lessons. But if you stood with me so long, let's track something of great value. So they were able to, Silas were able to bring those two brothers out of that cycle of violence and to think themselves a little bit more instead of thinking only about revenge, as they were in the process of becoming a mono idea, only think of revenge, right? And now it's time to continue the execution to finalize the plan. And he goes back to the spiritual world, find someone who could provide them good music, and not by choice, they choose Beethoven's Pastorale, which is the Sixth Symphony, and I hope it does stimulate the curiosity of everyone to check what it is if you don't know what it is. It's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful symphony that is all about the bucolic scene, things of the land, in which starts as a calm, beautiful day in the field, and then comes a storm. I think I'm sorry. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then comes a storm. And the storm things get glooming, and the sky turns dark, and you can actually feel all of that in the music, in the symphony. And then comes the huge storm with thunders and everything else, and then it passes, and the calms that come after the storms again become melodic and calm and beautiful. I'm sure Fabio could give us a lecture about that if we had time, right, Fabio? And it's really a beautiful symphony. And it's not by chance, right?
Yes, it's a beautiful symphony. You're right.
Yeah. And it's not by chance, because then it stimulates the emotions, the heart of both Clarencio with his desire to work the land, and this music is about land, and Leonel, that is about music. So it's a perfect combination, not by chance. And with that in mind, after excited the emotions with the music, they chose to go to the land again, to the lake, what I think happened horribly in the past. And now this time they would meet Alzira, who will become their mothers in the spiritual world in the next reincarnation. They are taken back to Mansão Pios, where now they will have the opportunity to prepare themselves for the redemption. As I said in the past, it was very important that these two brothers would buy into the idea of this new plan, would be willing, not only willing, but want to go to that reincarnation with good intention, with open heart, for the better chance of success. But again, it's not a free ride. And the way the Silas puts over here, I think is perfect for us to close this. Thank God, our text is over. Now let's hope that they will prepare themselves. Let's hope. There's no guarantee. Let's hope they will prepare themselves for the new battles on earth, for the redeeming work in which affection and aversion, joy and pain, struggles and difficulties will all be mixed together. And all the examples that he used before says exactly what this paragraph says. They are now receiving a wonderful opportunity, being taken to a house of assistance, receive all the preparation for the reincarnation with a plan to be achieved 100%, but there'll be natural challenges that happens with everybody's incarnation. I think there's so many wonderful lectures and lessons in this chapter that if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to stay. But write down those questions. We're going to have a Q&A, and I hope we can bring some of the questions for us in our next Q&A. But I'm open for any questions right now. And again, I'm sure I didn't cover not even 50% of all that we could gain for this chapter. If no questions, again, thanks again for staying so long, almost 20 minutes over, almost half an hour over. Carol, could you give a last prayer?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Elmo, for hosting our meeting today. And thank you, Sarita. We appreciate your reading for us today and everyone who is here participating. Infinite Creator and Divine Providence, we give thanks to be together as brothers and sisters for our studies of the book Action and Reaction, Chapter 10, entitled Understanding. Greed and selfishness need to be softened and faced during the reincarnation process. A welcome of good intention and positive fraternal connections are essential. The law of cause and effect is the redemptive process for us to repair the harm caused directly or indirectly during reincarnation or incarnation. Our guardian angel and protecting spirits are there to assist the reincarnation blueprint, the plan which hopefully can counter the negative forces surrounding this process. Multiple objectives can occur for an event in which the forces of good can assist many simultaneously. Divine justice eventually prevails with the upgrading of the understanding and greater awareness of karmic debts. It's a long process due to resistance, weakness of habit, and temptation. It's up to each individual to endeavor and to focus with hope. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors and the good spirits for guiding and inspiring us today. May we receive the love, the light, the peace of Christ within us, and for our loved ones, our teachers, our directors, our counselors, our mediums, our workers, and all of our participants. We pray for inner peace, and especially now for world peace, and for those who are suffering in the physical and spiritual worlds. We pray for our center SGNY and all spiritist centers throughout the world, that they may grow, prosper, expand, and be protected throughout the day and throughout the night. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to our family, our friends, loved ones, and co-workers. May we remind ourselves as we go forth to be beacons of love, of light, of peace, of service, and charity